Today the talk is called I Feel Like Doing Nothing, Struggling with Disinterest in Everything. Yeah. Yes, I think that people have this a lot when they get into non-duality. Before I answer that though, I'm first of all going to talk about what non-duality is, and then we will move on to the question. So what is non-duality? That's not so easy to put into words, but I will do my best. Non-duality is the recognition of what is free now. And it's not a recognition for someone. I would say it's more an energetic expansion. So when people are identified and they're walking around believing that they are their story, their thoughts, their ideas, they have this energetic feeling like they're inside their head or they're inside their body somewhere, mostly in their head. They feel like they're behind their eyes. And they feel like that this is their soul. And so if they die, that is the soul that will then go on to heaven. And often they imagine their soul like their body, actually. So they kind of see their soul looking like their body and having the similar characteristics as the body. Whereas in non-duality, we question that idea, whether there is a separate soul living inside these bodies. And what I love about non-duality is it's not conceptual, what's being suggested, it's really your own experience. So as a teacher, you're always pointing the student to their own experience. So it's not something I can really teach you, but it's something that I can point to and for you to go into and explore for yourself. So most people, they walk around in their bodies, or believe that they are their bodies. So they feel like they are somebody inside their bodies, and that they're moving their body independently from the world and independently from everything else around them. So they feel like they have been born on a certain day, they've been born into a certain country, they've lived a particular life, they've made certain choices, and all of it belongs to them, which is quite a lot of pressure, that all to belong to them, this whole thing. And they feel predominantly that they are defined by what they've chosen in this life. Not all things are defined by what's chosen, but whether they've chosen to go and become a doctor, or whether they didn't have a choice because of lack of funds, they still see it as them. So not having funds and then not being able to further your education is them, is who they are. That's such an existential idea, that we are our choices, that we are our past, that we are everything that we tell ourselves. In non-duality, this would be called suffering, that we identify with a story through time and we believe that is who we are. That we are that story, we are somebody that became a doctor, we are somebody that did good things, we are somebody that did bad things. And the reason that in non-duality they would call it suffering is because it's like trying to catch water in a net. So trying to be this story and remain as this story is such an impossibility, because time is always moving and we are always changing and evolving dependent on our circumstance, our environment. So to try to be this solid thing that's moving with us through time, like I am a doctor, I am a good person, is so stressful, because how can you live a whole life as a good person? Surely you're going to do something bad. And how do we even know what good is ultimately, when we just know such a microcosm of the experience. Like, we don't see the whole of humanity or the whole of life happening at the same time. We don't know whether because we press this button here in this country it causes a massive earthquake the other side of the world. Like, we don't know how it's happening. Like, if you've ever heard of quantum entanglement, that really blows your mind. Like, quantum entanglement is the idea that when two atoms have interacted, they always and forever will then affect the movement of each other. That is insane. What does that mean? So to try to remain as a good person your whole life, and to have not done sin, this is a very, I think, stressful life. The other reason that non-duality would call it suffering is because when you identify with something, so with a story of being a doctor and being a good person, you automatically begin to associate your happiness with pleasure. So let me explain that a bit more. So as you identify with a story that moves through time, you believe that your happiness as that person moving through time is based on pleasure. So it's based on having nice evenings out with your partner, not arguing with your partner, having a nice house, having lots of money or a certain amount of money, or living in nature, or having certain foods, having a certain amount of children, having your children treat you in a certain way, being promoted at your job, having recognition, people loving you. And these things are nice aspirations to have. But when we take it to be us and to be our happiness, it becomes incredibly stressful. So non-duality suggests that happiness, or what you're truly looking for, is the pure being of what you are. So it's beingness, it's being here, this, right now, right here. So your essence is a freedom, your essence is the happiness that you look for. But when you believe it's in these moving ideas and objects, it's again like trying to catch water in a net, because you can't make things remain. So you'll get a nice house and then a hurricane will come through. Or you get a nice house and in 5 years, after 5 kids and like crazy life, like there will need to be lots of repairs or painting. Like, we can't stop things decaying, we can't stop things changing. That doesn't mean that you, on a human level, don't strive to have nice things. I'm not talking about like self-destruction or self-abandonment, but it's that the idea that you are this solid moving person through time, and then in time your happiness comes. And this creates so much stress, because the person is always looking to the future for its next happiness. So there is no longer this connection to beingness of what you are. You're living in this mental reality of what you've got to get tomorrow, what you've got to get in a week, what you've got to get in a year. So you're encouraging this abstract thinking and this narrative of you and what you've got to get to be happy. And then life is missed. You're not vibrating and singing in beingness, in this alive presence of what you are. You're dreaming about something better in another time, which you'll never have. Time doesn't really exist if you think about it. So you never really get all these things that you want in time, because time is such an abstract thing. To base your happiness on time creates suffering. It's like a dog chasing its tail, or trying to catch water in a butterfly net. It's impossible. I know that's hard for people that are new to this subject to grasp, like, why would it be hard not to get happiness and freedom in time? Well, firstly, who is this you that is trying to get happiness and freedom in time? And where is this time? And does that ever work? Have you ever achieved something and then you go to the ceremony and you don't really enjoy it? It's all this daydreaming about achieving something or becoming something, and then when you get there you're like, it's not so great. It's because your happiness in every moment is dependent on whether you are connected to God or the self, beingness, alive presence. It's not about what you get or what you do in life, and that's humans' biggest mistake. Yeah, so this is what non-duality teaches. And so let's look at this this person that you think yourself to be. Like, who is this person that you imagine yourself to be? This person that came into the room and sat down. Where is that person? Who is that person? So you came into the room, you sat down, and then later on you're going out with friends for dinner, and then you have like this image of yourself. But do you notice that that image of yourself is changing, dependent on your mood? So if you're being very self-hating, you have a particular image of yourself. If you're being self-loving, who is this person? It's such an abstract notion that you are sitting here. If you're really present, you're so present, it's not even you as an image being present anymore. There is simply presence. Where is that person? Is that person actually alive and experiencing? This is the core to non-duality. It's so exciting to talk about. I just so love it. Is this person existing? You've been told by the whole of society, you've been telling yourself that you're alive all this time, but how is it that you can have moments of being present and there's not a you there? The image of you has faded, the ideas of you have faded. So what is it that's present? And what is it that sees the you that's coming and going? So the images of you come into existence, the ideas of you, that chatting mind that's chatting to itself, like, oh, you should do this, or you shouldn't do that, or you're a bozo, or you're not a bozo. Who is it that's watching that? If you really pay attention, you notice something's watching that. So if something is watching that, that which is being watched cannot be me. There is something prior to that. And who is that? This is so exciting. Who is experiencing now? What is experiencing now? So this is where, non-duality speaks a lot about not to-ness. This is where you find not to-ness. So if you recognize that something is watching the person, what we call it in non-duality is consciousness. So there is this consciousness that is watching the person. The person is appearing and disappearing in consciousness. And also we call it beingness. So there is this alive presence and this empty looking, this consciousness that's always here. And in that, the person comes and goes. Thoughts of you come and go. Ideas of you come and go. Your past comes and goes. The idea of what you're going to get in the future comes and goes, but that consciousness and the beingness is always here, alive and present. It's radical. So if you really notice that, and then you explore this consciousness, is anything appearing outside of your consciousness? Do you ever experience outside of your consciousness? You imagine outside of your consciousness, so you imagine Donald Trump, you imagine the Dalai Lama, you imagine the moon. But do you ever experience outside of your consciousness? Even if you see photos of the moon, or you listen to news reports, all of it is happening inside your consciousness. Isn't that like mind-blowing? The fact that we never think about this, although we don't get taught it at school, is insane. It's what's always here is consciousness, and this sense of being. Or you could call it the I am, live presence. And everything's appearing and disappearing in that. The room, your house, your bank balance, the ideas of you, that is what's always here. Is this empty looking. It's so free. It's so radical. You don't do anything for it. You don't have to beg God to be more conscious. You don't have to ask for more of it. You're always awake. You're always conscious. You is not always conscious. You is coming and going. That's who you believe yourself to be. The story of you, the ideas of you. But you and the I am is always here. And most people are so uninterested in it, even though that is phenomenal. And that's not the end of the story, the consciousness and the I am. Because when you begin to go into it, it gets even more and more bonkers. So as you begin to go into it, then there is a falling back into the big consciousness or universal consciousness. The same with the I am. You go into it and it goes into this beingness. And this big consciousness and the beingness is absolutely impersonal. It's all things and it's totally empty. It's nothing. So what happens in the investigation in non-duality, you start with the personal consciousness, the I am, and then you investigate it and they're like portals to the infinite. Both ways. This way, sort of backwards, even though it's not really backwards, is empty. And then if you go this way, it's full. And then the masculine, so the fullness is the feminine, and the emptiness is the masculine. They come together and make one. You can imagine it like the yin and yang sign. So the emptiness meets the fullness, and this is the divine, this is God. In non-duality, it's maybe not God in some Christian sects, maybe in some it is. It's most probably what Jesus taught, but it then just got already diluted into doership and me and God, me separate from God. So right now you think you are looking out of the eyes, but actually God is looking out of the eyes, the divine is looking out of the eyes through the filter of you. And for some individuals, they believe that the consciousness and the character, the story of themselves, are one and the same thing. For some it has separated, and for some it has separated and then expanded back into everything and nothing. It's totally divine. So, if we go back to the question, what was the question? I feel like doing nothing. I forgot it. feel like doing nothing, struggling with disinterest in everything. So when this begins to wake up, it can be very common that two things happen. One, you can fall back into lots of bliss, and through falling into lots of bliss, there's very little urge to do anything. Because if you're in such bliss, where would there be inspiration or urges to do anything? If sitting on the sofa is really blissful, then somebody inviting you to do anything, you might say yes, but it doesn't make any difference. So bliss is a side effect of this realization. So in India, and Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was my teacher's teacher, he would say, call it Sat Chitananda. So when beingness and consciousness, so in the big consciousness, the emptiness meets beingness, the love, the fullness, when they come together, the emptiness, the nothingness and the everything, so an awakening happens, then so Sat, Chit, Ananda, then there is bliss. And Nisargadatta splits it into two things. So that is bliss, but that bliss is beyond the person. Your beingness, your empty looking meeting, is bliss, is home, is everything you've ever looked for. But it's not a feeling or a sensation or something you can see. But what happens in the character, and this part comes and goes, is the character becomes blissful. So the character becomes full of bliss, the experience of bliss. That blissfulness comes and goes. Anything in life comes and goes, it's not permanent. What's permanent is bliss, is the home of what you are, which doesn't move. But it comes and goes as blissfulness in the character. But yeah, when that character is in a lot of bliss, so when it's in itself, and then when there's blissfulness manifesting through the character, like, what would be the urge to do something? You're totally complete. So urges might arise, but most of the time, for most people, it's like a massive reduction in doing. So Ramana Maharshi, he sat for many years in silence, not really moving. Ananda Mahima, she also did a lot of sitting and not moving and silence for I think 3 years. So it can be very common that for the blissful. But then there's this other part that can happen, and that's called like walking through the desert. So you know how Jesus walked through the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, and the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree for 40 days and 40 nights. And this is the part where there's two different parts, where the walking through the desert is where everything becomes very dry. So because you know that nothing in time will bring you freedom, nothing in time will bring you what you really want, so you know this, you've had awakenings, but yet it's not your experience, then everything becomes like cactuses because it's not really tasty anymore. Prior, you could taste pleasure because you didn't really know who you were. You could take pleasure and it'd kind of make you feel better about yourself. It would sustain you for a period. So say you fell in love or something, it would sort of pick your energy levels up, give you lots of pleasure, and you'd feel positive emotion. But then through time that would dissipate, and then you'd need someone else, a new person. But when you've had an awakening, you kind of know that these pleasures don't really work. And through that knowing, there's kind of a losing of interest in them and an inability to give them all the meaning that they had before. So falling in love and having kids isn't the answer to everything. And through knowing that, it makes everything disinteresting, you could say. Because you know, going to Barbados for a 2-week holiday isn't going to satisfy you. Might be a nice change of environment. You might not have to work, but it isn't going to give you what you're looking for. And maybe if you've come from really intense work and then you go to Barbados for 2 weeks, like, you can't really relax because your body is on go, 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 go. So it's really not pleasurable. And then you kind of know this. So that's what it means by walking through the desert. So you've had the awakening, but you're still identified, and pleasures can't give you that hit anymore. You can't inject yourself with a new love affair or something, or buying a massive sports car, or I don't know, whatever people get off on. And then this can actually also turn into depression. And this is where having a really strong spiritual practice is important, because you can then begin to, because you're not getting your hits of pleasure which are sustaining you before, you can then begin to get into negative mindset and into a depressive mindset, and you don't really realize it. It just bit by bit creeps in, and then it's like tumbleweed. It sort of tumbles through you. What's the point in doing this? And then, because you're not interacting, you're sort of getting more and more low energy and more depressed and more sense of meaninglessness. And then maybe your ego, your mind really grabs onto that because your ego is being destroyed by non-duality. It sort of fights back and it realizes that depression works, that life is meaningless, or this is pointless, or there's nothing here for me, and so it then grabs onto it and holds on to that story because it wants to exist. And when there is a belief in it, that's very tempting to believe life is pointless and, this non-duality was a mistake. So having a strong spiritual practice there is good, that you're really committed to and you know the benefits of. Just as a side note, spiritual practices can't bring you to freedom because there is no you to bring to freedom. But spiritual practices help the body, mind, and help the ego with stability, with breaking addictive patterns, with breaking very chaotic mind activity. So when this part comes, which comes for a lot of people, if you've got that strong spiritual practice, it will support you through those ideas and not let the hole or the sinkhole of depression suck you in. And so if you are feeling that and you are experiencing depression through disinterest in things, then really recommend to take up a spiritual practice or start working with somebody one-to-one. I know that's really hard if you get into depression, what you feel like doing is nothing. But that idea that there's nothing to do, or the idea that you've got to go through this, sometimes can be counterproductive. Sometimes you need support and a practice to help you get through some of these stages. And ultimately, it's not you that wakes up, But for most people, it's an apparent you that goes through an illusory journey to deconstruct themselves. And then in the end, there is the realization that there is nobody there. Nobody wakes up. But there is an apparent person that believed it was someone and is living in a mental cage that undoes itself. And then with a certain amount of stability and undoing, then a new possibility can come through. That switch from being identified, consciousness identified with a person, to consciousness being all and the person being in the background. Yeah. Another thing that it can be is the Buddha's story of sitting under the Bodhi tree for 40 days and 40 nights. So what the Buddha did in that time was he did what Nisargadatta calls discernment. So heaven and hell presented itself and he stayed still. So he, as beingness and consciousness, stayed still. So what happened in his mind was all these heavens and hells presented themselves and he remained as the witness, as the consciousness. It's not really an effort, but it sometimes can feel like an effort and a discernment. This isn't true, this isn't true. So he got like hundreds of virgins apparently. And he knew that going and playing with all the virgins wouldn't give him what he wanted. He remained still. The desert of depression presented itself. He knew that wasn't true. He knew that wasn't who he was. And he knew that it wouldn't lead anywhere. So he stayed still. Depression is a very very glittery mind activity. It can really, the idea that you've messed up, that it's your fault and you're stuck and everything is meaningless and you're not going to ever get anywhere and your life is always going to be unhappy. Whatever the stories tell, that's really juicy. The mind, the storyteller wants to stay in control, not because it's bad or evil, but because that's its job, is to keep telling stories. So it wants the stories to be viewed, just like on Netflix, they create more and more dramatic TV series because they want to be viewed. So doing the practice to help stabilize these emotions and these depressive energies can be really helpful to settle down the person and to break some of those patterns. But in the end, the key to it is remaining still. You are not the one settling down the depressive patterns. You're not the one doing the practices. You're not the one that is depressed. You're not the one that's being offered all the virgins. You are stillness. Stillness. God, that's such a crazy idea, the idea of being offered virgins. That really doesn't work for a woman. Maybe other women it might work for, but who cares? That could only be a massive ego that cares. This woman has never slept with anyone before. Yes, I am the first. Sorry, I've just never really thought about that before, of how crazy that is. If you asked a dog if it minded if the female dog was a virgin or not, or a horse. Here, horse, have a virgin horse. Yeah. Maybe it does work for some women the other way around, I don't know.